Move, my father said, his hand already on the back of my chair. That seat isn't for you. I did not move at first. I honestly thought he was joking. My mother was still standing near the end of the table with the serving spoon in her hand. My brother was smiling at something my uncle had said. My aunt was reaching for the breadbasket. The roast had just been carved. Glasses were full. The overhead light was warm. It was the kind of family dinner that looked normal from a front window. Then my mother leaned down toward me, close enough that I could smell her perfume under the rosemary and butter from the kitchen. That seat, she said quietly, is for the child we actually built a future for. She said it calmly. That was what made it worse. The room did not go silent. It went careful. Forks slowed. My aunt lowered her eyes to her plate. My uncle looked into his wine glass as if he had suddenly discovered something interesting in it. My brother looked at my father, then away again. No one stepped in. No one laughed and called it a bad joke. No one said my name. My father pulled my chair back 2 places and set it down beside a folded white name card that had not been there when I helped set the table earlier that afternoon. Not far, just far enough to make a point. I kept my hand on the back of the chair for a second longer than I should have. It was the old dining chair with the tiny split in the varnish near the top rail. The one I had always used since I was 13 because I could hook my thumb into that little crack when I was nervous. I had done that through school report cards, graduation dinners, church holidays, every family conversation where I needed something steady to hold. My father lifted my hand off it. "Don't make this awkward," he said. That was one of his favorite sentences. He used it whenever he was the one making things awkward. I looked down at the white card near my new place, my mother's handwriting. My name, beside it, was another card. Daniel Mercer. I did not know him yet. I knew the Mercers by reputation. Everyone in our church did. Solid family, good money without being flashy. 2 sons. One of them in finance. The kind of family people described as respectable when they wanted that word to mean safe, wealthy, and easy to brag about. I looked up at my mother. Her expression was composed in that polished hostess smile she used for neighbors, churchwomen, and anyone she needed to impress. "There," she said. "That's better." I moved because the only other option was to make a scene before I understood the rules of it. That was the thing about my parents. They were careful. They never humiliated me in ways that would look obvious if repeated later. They did it in controlled rooms, with low voices, with enough politeness around the edges that anyone hearing the story secondhand could say there must have been a misunderstanding. I sat down, 2 seats down, away from the old chair, away from the center of the table. Away from the place I had occupied for years without ever realizing it could be reassigned. What nobody at that table knew was that my future had not failed. It had been opened, read, and quietly taken from me by the same people who were now deciding where I was allowed to sit. If you've ever felt your place in your own family change in a single second, you know how cold a room can get without anyone raising their voice. For most of my life, I thought my parents were strict, in a way that still counted as love. They believed in discipline. They believed in order. They believed children should be guided toward practical decisions. That was how everything was framed in our house. If I felt controlled, I was told I was being dramatic. If I felt dismissed, I was told I was sensitive. If I noticed my brother receiving something I never even knew to ask for, I was told different children had different needs. My brother Evan was 2 years older than me, and my parents always spoke about him in forward motion, promising, focused, driven. He was not more disciplined than I was. He was not kinder. He was not even more consistent. But he moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never had to wonder whether the people around him thought his future was worth funding. When I did well in school, my father nodded. When Evan did well, my father called relatives. When I brought home awards, my mother said she was proud of my work ethic. When Evan got a decent grade after not studying until the night before, she said, "He really has something." It sounds small when you list it, almost petty. But favoritism does not always begin with obvious cruelty. Sometimes it begins with vocabulary, with where admiration settles, with which child gets introduced as a future success and which child gets described as dependable. By the time I was 16, I had already heard my mother say, "We're just being realistic about you," so many times that the sentence had started to feel like weather. She said it when I talked about colleges farther from home. She said it when I mentioned scholarships with competitive essays. She said it when I wanted to visit campuses and my father said gas was expensive. At first, I thought she meant I should be practical, careful, responsible. It took me years to understand that what she really meant was smaller. Smaller plans, smaller needs, smaller life. Evan never heard that sentence. He heard things like, "You need room to grow." He heard, "A young man needs options." He heard, "We want to launch you right." That difference shaped the entire house. I remember the first time it became visible enough to touch. I came home one afternoon during senior year and my room felt lighter in the wrong way. Not clean, not organized, missing. My planner was gone from the desk. It was a thick spiral planner with tabs and sticky notes and my whole life laid out across months of application deadlines, essay drafts, scholarship codes, teacher recommendation reminders, and campus research I had done quietly from library computers because it felt safer not to do too much of it at home. That planner was proof that I had not been daydreaming. I had been building something. I found it later in a box in the hallway closet beneath old wrapping paper and a set of guest towels. Not thrown out, not destroyed, just packed away, like something someone had already decided I would not need. At the same time, Evan's dark blue college hoodie had appeared hanging over the back of my desk chair. Not his room, mine. I stood there looking at that hoodie for almost a full minute. Thick cotton, new fabric, the school name bright across the chest, the kind of thing parents buy when they are proud in public. I touched the sleeve once. It was heavier than I expected. Or maybe I just wasn't used to holding evidence of what investment looked like in my house. When I asked my mother why my planner had been moved, she did not say she moved it. She said, "I was tidying." Then she looked at the planner in my hands and said the sentence again. "We're just being realistic about you, sweetheart. There's no point turning your whole life into pressure." Pressure. That was how she renamed ambition when it came from me. I should have argued. I should have said it was my desk, my planner, my future. Instead, I stood there feeling childish for caring. That was one of my parents' gifts. They could make me feel unreasonable for noticing what they were doing. At dinner that night, my father announced that he and my mother had sent Evan his first housing deposit for college. My aunt clapped. My uncle asked about the dorm. Evan grinned and said he might rush a fraternity. My father laughed like even his least serious thoughts were proof that his life was beginning correctly. Then my aunt turned to me and asked, "And what about you, honey? Have you heard back from any schools yet?" Before I could answer, my mother said, "She's considering a different path. Different path." Another phrase used in my house to make a closed door sound mature. I remember touching the crack in the dining chair that night and looking at the roast on my plate while everyone moved on. I remember going upstairs later and seeing Evan's hoodie still on my chair. I remember understanding, even then, that objects start telling the truth before people do. Senior year made me quiet in a way that looked like obedience. It was not obedience. It was strategy. My parents had taught me early that direct confrontation only gave them more material to use against me. If I got upset, I was unstable. If I pushed, I was difficult. If I wanted too much, I was unrealistic. So I learned to become careful. I asked questions softly. I kept copies of things. I wrote everything down. That is why the planner mattered. It was not just a notebook. It was a record. Inside it were test dates, scholarship deadlines, notes from my guidance counselor, reminders to request transcripts, and a list of colleges ranked by likelihood, distance, and financial aid. I had even made a page of possible campus jobs and rough monthly budgets because I knew if I ever got out, I would need to understand exactly how. I did all of it mostly alone. My father liked to speak as though our family had one set of values, but what we really had were two tracks. For Evan, there were resources. When his laptop got old, he got a new one because college students needed reliable technology. When he toured schools, my parents turned the trip into a small celebration with lunch out, bookstore photos, and talk about dorm life. When the first tuition bill came, my father casually mentioned a college savings account we've been building for years. For years. I still remember how fast I looked up from my plate. I had never heard of any account for me. I knew right then that asking at the table would be humiliating. That was another thing my family had trained into me, the knowledge that wanting equal treatment would be made to sound selfish. So I asked my mother 2 days later in the laundry room while she was folding towels, "Was there one for me too?" She did not stop folding. "Honey," she said gently, "college makes sense for some children more than others. Some children," as though we were examples in a parenting article. "I have the grades," I said. "I've done everything I was supposed to do." "You've done fine." Fine. I still think that word hurt more than if she had called me incapable. Then came the sentence, "We're just being realistic about you." I stood there holding a warm towel and had the strange feeling that the room had shifted 1 degree off balance. Not enough to make me fall. Enough to make me understand that there would never be money waiting for me in the same way. After that, the small losses started happening so consistently that I almost missed how coordinated they were. I asked my father to sign a financial aid form requiring parent income verification. He left it on the kitchen counter for 3 days, then said he had misplaced it. I printed another copy. He said we should wait until all the options are clearer. I reminded him of the deadline. He said deadlines were exactly how young people trap themselves in bad decisions. He never said no. He let time say it for him. The same thing happened with another form tied to housing eligibility. My mother said not to borrow trouble before I knew whether I had been accepted. When I pointed out that some things had to be completed early, she smiled in that patient, vaguely pitying way she used when she wanted to make urgency sound childish. At church, the damage spread outward in a softer language. Women who had known me since I was little began saying things like, "You'll make some man very happy one day," and "You've always had such a nurturing spirit." Those can sound like compliments if you have never heard them used as a trap. One Sunday near the coat rack, I overheard my mother talking to Mrs. Holloway, whose daughter was in graduate school and whose son was in law school, and who treated every family conversation like a resume comparison. My mother laughed softly and said, "She's more relationship-oriented than academic." Mrs. Holloway said, "That can be a blessing too." My mother answered, "Exactly. We're trying to be realistic about her." I remember exactly where I was standing when I heard that half turn toward the parish bulletin board, my hand inside my coat sleeve, staring at a paper flyer for the spring bake sale while my mother condensed my life into something ornamental and harmless. That was one of the social losses that hurt more than paperwork. I was being narrated, and because I was quiet, because I had not yet learned that silence is often mistaken for agreement, people believed the version of me they were given. Have you ever stood near enough to hear someone calmly rewrite your life while everyone around them nodded like it made perfect sense? By winter, my future had become a topic handled around me instead of with me. Relatives stopped asking where I was applying and started asking whether I was seeing anyone serious. When I brought up scholarship essays, my father changed the subject to cost of living. When I mentioned a school 2 states away, my mother asked whether I really wanted that kind of pressure. Then there were the visual changes inside the house. The planner stayed hidden unless I took it out and put it back myself. Evan's hoodie kept appearing in my room. My desk slowly gathered his things printouts from his school. A campus map. A bookstore receipt. A list of dorm supplies my mother had highlighted. It was the domestic version of erasure, not dramatic enough to point to one single moment. Just enough to make me feel like the room itself understood whose future mattered more. The school I wanted most was not glamorous enough for a movie ending. It was a good university with a strong program, decent aid, and enough distance from home that I could build a life without seeing my parents' expectations at every holiday dinner. I wanted it with the kind of seriousness people often mistake for quietness. I told almost no one. I revised the essay 3 times. I tracked every deadline. I met with my guidance counselor twice. I requested recommendation letters early. I triple-checked that every part of the application had been submitted. Then I waited. Everyone else at school started getting decisions. Acceptance letters, wait lists, rejections, something. I got nothing. At first, I assumed my file was delayed or incomplete. I emailed once and received an automated message about processing time. I checked my spam folder. I checked the applicant portal. I checked on my phone between classes, before bed, sometimes in the middle of the night. Nothing. It fit too neatly with the story my parents had been telling. Maybe I was not the kind of daughter people invested in, because maybe I was not the kind of daughter worth the risk. That was the psychological part no one talks about enough. Sabotage works best when it harmonizes with the doubt already placed inside you. One night at dinner, my father said, "Not hearing back is information too." My mother added, "Sometimes the universe closes doors for a reason." I remember looking at my plate and thinking, no. Sometimes people close them and then call it wisdom. Still, I said nothing. I was not ready. Not yet. But something had started hardening inside me. A part of me that had spent years being polite was beginning to understand that politeness was exactly what they were counting on. The midpoint shock in my story did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a login record. It was a Tuesday night in late April. Evan was home from campus for a long weekend with 2 duffel bags, 3 laundry baskets, and the same assumption he had always had that the house would reorganize around him. His hoodie was back on my chair. My mother had made his favorite casserole. My father had opened a bottle of wine because it's good to have the boy home. After dinner, I went upstairs to submit one final scholarship application before midnight. My phone battery had died, so I opened my laptop instead. I checked my email first. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed a row of old admissions emails with the little red markers beside them. I frowned. I did not remember opening them. I clicked on the first one. Congratulations. That was the first word. The rest came into focus, one line at a time. I had been admitted. Conditional merit review. Additional financial documentation required. Parent authorization needed for one piece of the package. Deadline. Passed. I stared so long at the screen that the room seemed to narrow around the light of it. Then I opened the next email. Reminder notice. The next, final reminder. I'll read. I checked the access details. The first message had been opened on a day I was at school for a debate competition and did not have my laptop with me. The access log showed our home IP address. My body went cold in a strangely calm way. I clicked through the email thread one more time. That was when I saw the sent message. From my account. In my name? A short reply declining further documentation and indicating that I would not be moving forward with enrollment review. I had not written it. They had not just ignored the deadline. They had answered for me. That changed everything. Up until then, I had still been half living inside the softer possibility that they were negligent, biased, controlling, but not deliberate. The moment I saw that email, the whole story rearranged itself. This was not favoritism floating on habit. This was active sabotage. They had logged into my account, used my name, and quietly turned my future down in language polite enough to sound responsible. I sat there with my planner open beside the laptop and did not cry. Not yet. First, I printed everything. The admissions email, the reminder notices, the access record, the sent reply. I printed until the old printer downstairs made that irritated chewing noise it always made when the paper tray was low. No one shouted up to ask what I was doing. That house had trained everyone in it to ignore sounds they did not want to explain. I placed the papers into a plain manila folder from the desk drawer. That folder mattered more than I realized at the time. Pain alone would never beat my parents. Evidence might. Then I set the folder on my desk beneath Evan's hoodie and looked at the 2 objects together. The hoodie was their investment. The folder was mine. One soft, visible, publicly celebrated. One flat, quiet, dangerous. The next morning, I called the admissions office from the school library. A woman named Miss Alvarez answered. Her voice was calm, even, and entirely uninterested in family performance. I gave her my applicant information and explained, as carefully as I could, that I had only just discovered the emails and that a reply had been sent from my account without my permission. There was a pause while she checked the file. Then she said, "I can confirm there was a response declining documentation. If that response was not authorized by you, we need to note that. Such a dry sentence for the collapse of one version of a life. I asked whether my admission itself had been real. "Yes," she said, "your admission offer was real." I closed my eyes for a second, not because it felt like victory, because it meant my disappointment had been manufactured. There is a particular cruelty in letting someone believe they failed when you know they did not. Miss Alvarez explained the appeal process. She asked for screenshots and a written statement. She told me not to promise myself an outcome yet because deadlines complicated everything, but she also said the words I needed most. "We can verify what is in the file." Verify. That word steadied me. In families built on narrative control, a calm witness matters more than an emotional ally. Miss Alvarez did not know me. She was not on my side in the sentimental sense. She was simply competent. That was enough to make her dangerous to people like my parents. I spent that afternoon submitting everything from the library. I changed my passwords. I emailed screenshots. I attached my statement. I went home and said nothing. People often imagine that a person who discovers betrayal immediately confronts the betrayers. But I knew my parents. If I accused them in the kitchen, they would recast it as confusion. If I cried, I would be unstable. If I shouted, I would be disrespectful. If I brought evidence too early, they would prepare an explanation before anyone else ever saw it. If the truth was going to survive, it had to arrive where their performance was strongest. At the table, in front of witnesses, that opportunity came faster than I expected. 2 days later, my mother announced we would be hosting a dinner on Sunday. Just family and a few close friends, she said, which in her language meant something highly staged. Then she added, "The Mercers are coming." The Mercers. The family from the name card. The family my aunt had mentioned earlier in the spring. The family whose son was now apparently important enough to place beside me at dinner. My father said, "It'll be good for everyone to hear what's next." What's next? As if my life had become a transition line in his script. I went upstairs afterward and looked at the manila folder on my desk. Then at the planner. Then at Evan's hoodie. The planner was worn at the corners from months of being opened and hidden. The hoodie still hung over my chair like a claim. The folder was neat and thin and official. 3 objects. 3 versions of my future. The one I built. The one they funded. The one that could expose them. I put the folder in my bag. Then I opened the planner and wrote 1 sentence under Sunday's date. Bring the truth to the table. If you've ever found proof that the pain in your life was not an accident but a decision, you know how strangely calm the world can look right before everything changes. The day before the dinner, Miss Alvarez sent me one more email. She could not promise a full reinstatement of my aid review yet, but she confirmed that my file reflected unauthorized interference and that she would verify that directly if necessary. I printed that email too. The stack of paper inside the folder grew thicker. That night, my mother knocked once on my bedroom door and asked what dress I planned to wear on Sunday. Not what I wanted to say. Not whether I had plans. What dress? As if the logistics of my presentation mattered more than my consent. I said I had not decided. She looked at the green dress hanging on the closet door and said, "That one makes you look softer." Softer, not stronger. Not polished, not intelligent. Softer. After she left, I sat on my bed and looked around the room. My planner was in my lap. Evan's hoodie was still on the chair. The folder waited in my bag. For the first time in months, I did not feel confused. I felt clear. That does not mean I felt safe. It means I finally understood the shape of the trap. What would you do if the people who should have opened doors for you were the ones quietly locking them and smiling while they did it? My mother ironed the tablecloth on Sunday afternoon. That detail has stayed with me because it captured her perfectly. Even when arranging my humiliation, she wanted the linen flat. She moved through the house with controlled efficiency checking, serving dishes, polishing glasses, adjusting flowers, placing white name cards in exact positions. My father opened a bottle of red wine and stood in the dining room, reviewing the table as if preparing for a business dinner rather than a family performance. At 4 o'clock, my mother told me to get dressed. "Wear the green one," she said. "It's flattering." I wore it because by then I understood that refusing small instructions too early would only give them a chance to paint me as difficult before the real moment arrived. I placed the folder in my bag beneath my wallet and lipstick. I also slipped my planner in beside it at the last minute without fully knowing why. Something in me wanted that object close. Proof mattered, yes, but I also wanted one private thing in the room that belonged only to me. When I came downstairs, the dining room was already set. Too many plates, too many glasses, too much intention in the arrangement, and there they were, the name cards. Small, white, thick paper, my mother's neat handwriting. My old seat, the chair with the crack in the varnish, was now Evan's. My card sat 2 places down beside Daniel Mercer. He arrived with his parents 20 minutes later. Daniel was older than me by enough years that everyone was pretending not to say it. Late 20s, maybe 30. Clean shirt, good watch. The kind of polite face older women trust immediately. There was nothing visibly vulgar about him, which made the whole thing worse. Outrage is easier when the chosen future looks ugly. This one looked respectable. That was exactly why my parents thought they could get away with it. He shook my hand with the measured confidence of a man at a networking dinner. "Nice to finally meet you," he said. Finally. That single word told me enough. Not everything. Enough. Dinner began with the smooth, almost boring rhythm of church hospitality. My father carved the roast. My mother passed potatoes. Mrs. Mercer complimented the table setting. Mr. Mercer discussed property taxes with my uncle. Evan talked about internships. Everyone performed normalcy with professional skill. I sat beside Daniel and felt the folder against my ankle inside my bag. There are moments when your body knows before your mind does that something irreversible is approaching. Mine did. Every small sound sharpened. Silverware on china, ice against glass, my mother's laugh, the rustle of linen when someone reached for bread. No one mentioned me directly at first. That was part of the choreography. Soften the atmosphere, build the contrast, let the room accept the frame before the humiliation enters it. Dessert was waiting in the kitchen when my father finally shifted the conversation. He asked Evan about campus housing for next year. Evan answered easily, one arm draped over the back of my old chair. My father smiled the way men smile when their sons look expensive. Then he said, "He's got options." A simple sentence, a familiar one. My mother added, "We wanted to make sure he had every chance." Then my aunt, trying to be kind, turned to me and said, "And what about you, sweetheart? What's next for you?" My father answered before I could open my mouth, "She's taking a more stable path." Stable, carefully chosen. Not one person at that table would have objected to stability in the abstract. That was why he used the word. He was too practiced to say what he meant too early. Mrs. Holloway, who had somehow made herself part of yet another important family dinner, smiled and said, "There's a lot to be said for that." Daniel gave a polite nod in my direction. Then my father set one hand on the back of my chair, firm, possessive. And my mother laid her fingertips lightly on my forearm, as if tenderness could disguise control. "She doesn't need college to be useful," my mother said softly. The table held. No gasps, no dramatic reactions. Just that awful social stillness people choose when something indecent happens and they are deciding whether to protect the target or the atmosphere. My father continued, his voice calm and conversational. "She's not the one you invest in. She's the one you hand to someone who can handle her." It was the ugliest sentence anyone had ever said about me, and he said it like he was discussing weatherproofing. Daniel did not protest. He did not even look confused. He simply gave one restrained nod, like a man acknowledging terms already explained elsewhere. That nod made my skin go cold. This was not matchmaking. It was transfer. I looked at the cracked varnish on my old chair beneath Evan's arm. I looked at the white card with Daniel's name beside mine. I looked at my mother's hand resting on my forearm like this was care. I understood in one clean second that they meant to finish my future in public. So I stood up. The chair scraped hard across the floor. That was the first openly rude sound of the evening. Every face turned toward me with the same expression, relief that the scene now had a recognizable source. If I cried, I would become the problem. If I shouted, I would become unstable. If I left, they would say I embarrassed myself and spoiled a lovely family dinner. I did none of those things. I reached down, picked up my bag, and set it carefully on the table. My father's voice lowered. "Sit down." I ignored him. My mother said, sharper now, "Don't do this." Do not do what? Notice? Remember? Refuse? I opened the bag and took out the folder. Paper against polished wood. Such a small sound. Such a useful one. "I think," I said, and my own voice surprised me with how steady it was. "Before anyone talks any more about what kind of future I do or do not need, there's something this table should see." My father's face changed then. Only slightly, but enough. "What is that?" he asked. "You know exactly what it is." I pulled out the first page and laid it down where everyone could see the university letterhead. Acceptance notice. The second page. Reminder email. The third. Access log. The fourth. A sent reply from my account declining the requested documentation. No one touched the papers, but everyone leaned closer. My mother said, "This is not the time." I turned to her. No, I said. This is exactly the time. You picked the audience. Then I took out my phone. Earlier that day, I had emailed Miss Alvarez and asked whether she might be available if I needed official clarification that evening. Her reply had been one sentence. If you need me to verify the file, call. So I called. The room listened to the ringing. 1, 2. She answered on the second ring. Admissions, Alvarez speaking. I put her on speaker and gave my name. There was a pause and the sound of typing. Yes, she said. I have your file. My father cut across the room. Turn that off right now. I did not look at him. Miss Alvarez, I said, can you confirm whether I was admitted? Yes, she said. You were offered admission contingent on the completion of follow-up financial documentation. A silence spread outward from the center of the table. Can you confirm, I asked, whether a response declining that documentation was sent from my account? Yes. And can you confirm whether the file reflects that I reported I did not authorize that response? Another pause. Yes. The record notes unauthorized interference with the process. Interference, not confusion, not delay, not a misunderstanding. Interference. No one moved for a full second after she said it. Then my aunt put her napkin down very carefully and looked at my parents. You knew? She asked. She did not ask me. She asked them. That was the first crack in their control. My father straightened and did what he always did when cornered by truth. He reached for authority. This is a family matter, he said, as though naming it would shrink it back into privacy. Miss Alvarez was still on speaker. With respect, she said, in that same level tone. The applicant was admitted. The process did not continue because required materials were not submitted and a response was received indicating she would not proceed. If that response was unauthorized, that is a serious concern. Serious concern. Another administrative phrase so calm it made everything uglier. I thanked her and ended the call. The room felt different after that. Not louder, not cleaner, just structurally changed. Like one hidden beam had shifted, and everyone inside the house could feel it. My mother spoke first. We were trying to protect her. There it was, the polished explanation, the adult version. The one that could make sabotage sound maternal if nobody examined it too closely. From what? My aunt asked. My mother looked at her as if the answer were obvious. From debt, from pressure, from making decisions she wasn't equipped to handle. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because hearing her still try to narrate me in front of proof felt almost surreal. My father turned toward the Mercers with a stiff smile. I'm sorry about this. There's been a misunderstanding. Daniel spoke before his parents did. A misunderstanding? He said, looking at the papers. It seems fairly clear. I do not know whether that came from decency or self-protection. It did not matter. He was the first person from their side of the table to step out of the role my parents had designed for him. Mrs. Mercer looked horrified. Mr. Mercer said nothing at all, which in certain families is louder than shouting. My brother had been silent the entire time. Now he stared at the documents the way people stare at wreckage they had benefited from without ever imagining the cost. Did you actually do this? He asked my father. My father answered him, not me. I did what was necessary. Necessary. That word snapped something cleanly inside me. Not violently, cleanly. I reached into my bag again and took out my planner. It looked ordinary in my hands, worn spiral binding, bent corners, sticky notes sticking out from the side, my own handwriting crowded into margins and blank spaces. The kind of object no one notices until it becomes evidence of a whole private effort. I set it on the table beside the printed acceptance email. Then, before I said anything else, I turned toward the sideboard, lifted Evan's college hoodie from the back of my old chair where he had dropped it earlier, folded it once, and placed it away from the center of the table. It was a small movement. That is exactly why it mattered. For the first time, his future was not draped over mine. Then I touched the planner. This, I said, is what my life actually looked like. I opened it to the pages covered in deadlines, application notes, budget lists, counselor reminders, scholarship codes, test dates, and one line written under Sunday's date. Bring the truth to the table. I touched the acceptance email beside it. And this, I said, is proof that I had a future you already knew about. That was the power shift, not just the documents. The visible contrast between the life I had built in private and the life they had tried to assign me in public. The planner, they packed away. The acceptance, they intercepted. The hoodie, they celebrated. All of it there on one table. No one could look at me anymore and pretend I had drifted into disappointment. I had worked. I had planned. I had applied. I had been serious. My mother's face changed first, not into remorse, into exposure. That distinction matters. Being found out is not the same thing as being sorry. She said the sentence one more time. We're just being realistic about you. It was the third time that line truly mattered in my story. The first time, it had sounded like concern. The second time, it had sounded like a wall. Now, in front of witnesses, with my planner open and my acceptance letter visible, it finally sounded like what it had always been. Control. No, I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. You weren't being realistic. You were deciding how small I was allowed to be. No one interrupted. When truth is shaped correctly, it can hold a room by itself. My aunt looked at my mother and said, "You let everyone think she didn't get in." My mother opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "She gets overwhelmed." That was another of her preferred lies. Any emotion I had became instability. Any urgency became overreaction. Any refusal became disrespect. I looked at her and said, "I only ever got overwhelmed when you stood in the doorway of my life and called it help." That was the closest I came to anger. My father said, "Watch your tone." I turned to him. "For years," I said, "you told me not to make things awkward, not to overreact, not to expect too much. While I was trying to be respectful, you logged into my account and answered for me. You declined my future and my name. And tonight you sat me next to a stranger so you could hand me over like a practical arrangement." The word arrangement hung there because everyone at the table now understood it. No one rushed to defend them. Not one person. Even Mrs. Holloway, who had opinions on everything, kept her mouth shut. My brother stood up from my old chair. That image has stayed with me. Not because it redeemed him. It did not. But because it marked the first time he physically stepped back from a place he had inherited without question. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I believed him about the details. I did not forgive the years. That is another truth people do not like. Some people benefit from a system without designing it, but the benefit still leaves a shape. I gathered the papers neatly into the folder. I closed the planner and slid it under my arm. I looked once at the white name card with Daniel's name beside mine, and then turned it face down. That sound cardboard against polished wood felt final. My mother said my name. Just my name? For years, I had wanted tenderness in the way she said it. That night, I heard only fear. I said, "I'm done letting you decide what counts as realistic for me." Then I walked out. If this hits something personal for you, stay with me through the ending, because exposing the truth is only one part of what it costs to take your life back. People like to imagine that once the truth comes out, the hard part is over. It is not. Truth changes the shape of a room. It does not immediately rebuild the person who had to survive inside it. I drove around for nearly an hour that night before pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy and crying into the steering wheel. Quietly. The green dress wrinkled at the waist. My makeup barely smudged because I had barely worn any. The folder on the passenger seat, the planner beside it. I cried for the obvious reasons. And for the less obvious ones. For the months I had spent thinking I had failed. For the forms I kept printing and reprinting while my father let time say no. For the women at church who had smiled and called me nurturing while my mother translated that into decorative usefulness. For the version of my future I had mourned as if it had collapsed under its own weakness when in fact it had been pushed. I did not go home that night. I stayed with a friend from school whose mother did not ask questions beyond whether I wanted tea and a blanket. Ordinary kindness nearly undid me more than the betrayal had. When you grow up in a house where every need has to justify itself, simple care can feel suspicious. The next morning, my phone was full. My mother had called 6 times. My father left one voicemail telling me I had humiliated the family and that adult matters should never have been aired that way. My brother texted once. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." My aunt texted twice. The second message said only, "I believe you." I kept that message for years. Proof is not only paper. Sometimes it is the first person willing to stop pretending. I did not answer my parents. I answered Miss Alvarez. I completed the appeal process. Over the next weeks, there were forms, statements, and careful conversations. The original aid review could not be restored exactly as it had been before, but my admission stood, and there were still pathways forward. Loans, work study, adjustments, practical complications my parents had always claimed only they understood. The difference was that now the choice was mine. When I returned to the house one last time to collect my things, my planner had been placed back on my desk. That angered me more than if it had stayed in the closet. It was my mother's way of pretending objects could erase motive. Evan's hoodie was gone. The room looked almost like mine again. Almost. I packed in silence. My father stayed in his study. My mother hovered once in the doorway and said, "You've made this much harder than it needed to be." I folded a sweater and placed it in my suitcase. "No," I said. "You did!" She waited, probably hoping for more emotion, more material, more chance to reinterpret. When none came, she left. Healing was not dramatic after that. I went to school. I worked. I learned how to fill out financial forms without flinching. I learned that being tired from carrying your own life feels different from being diminished inside someone else's version of it. I learned that success after sabotage does not feel triumphant all at once. Sometimes it feels suspicious. Sometimes you keep waiting for someone older to log in and answer for you. That was the scar. Not simply that my parents had favored my brother, that they had taught me to mistrust my own opportunities even after I had reached them. My relationship with Evan became polite and limited. He apologized more than once. I believed that he had not known the exact details. I also knew he had lived for years inside a house, arranged around his expansion while mine was quietly reduced. Understanding that did not make us close. As for my parents, I did not cut them off with speeches. I simply stopped giving them access to my interior life. Calls became occasional. Information became minimal. Distance did what confrontation never could. It deprived them of the chance to narrate me in real time. The final image of this story is not glamorous. It is me in a small apartment years later, at a second-hand desk under a lamp that leaned slightly left. My planner is open in front of me, no longer hidden, pages filled with deadlines that belong to me because I chose them. Beside it lies the acceptance letter I reprinted from my own secure account and kept longer than I needed to, not because I still required proof, but because I wanted a physical reminder that my future had once been intercepted and still reached me. Sometimes I touch the edge of that paper the way I used to touch the crack in the old dining chair. Old habit, different object, different meaning. We're just being realistic about you. When I hear that sentence now, it no longer sounds like wisdom. It sounds like fear wearing good manners. That is the scar. The healing is quieter. I no longer ask permission for the size of my life. If you could say one honest thing to the people who tried to decide your future for you, what would it be?